Should sport be free to watch? That's the question being debated in Canberra, and it's become a conversation about the role of sport in Australian society, how TV works in 2024, and what Australians deserve. In today's podcast, we're going to bring you up to speed on the latest developments from the Senate, how anti-siphoning laws actually work and what they mean, and what happens next. So Zara, you got back from your honeymoon on the weekend. And
how many times do you think we're going to reference it this week? Every
it
single
was
day?
It was a big void, and now that void is filled. But we haven't done one important thing, which is I haven't talked to you yet about sport.
Of course.
So welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you.
What was the last sporting match you properly watched on TV?
I think I probably passively consumed an AFL game.
All right, so
D's game.
You're on the couch, you're watching the D's.
Yeah.
How did you watch that?
On 7 Plus
Yeah.
on the app, because we don't have an antenna at home.
Right.
So everything's on the internet.
And I think that's a pretty common story for a lot of people our age. So you go on your smart TV.
I thought I was really technologically savvy there.
Well, it's, TVs with that sort of functionality aren't that expensive anymore. And I also have a TV at home that is connected to a streamer. But when I go to my parents' house, it's connected to the antenna and I click 9 to watch Channel 9. And last year's World Cup was an interesting kind of turning point, I think, for how people watch sport. So there were 3.6 million people who watched a Matildas match on a streaming device.
Fascinating. It's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people.
Yep.
So we're talking here laptops, iPhones, TVs that don't have antennas. And it's really called into question the way that our law governs what sport's free and what sport isn't, and how that legislation matches with the way that we consume television. And so that's been the big topic in Canberra yesterday, and I was keen to talk to you about it this morning. It's called the Communications Legislation Amendment, Prominence and Anti-siphoning Bill. Whole lot of jargon there.
Yeah, I was going to say, not the most thrilling of legislative names, but it's taken me a bit to get my head around this story. And so I do really just want to start at the beginning as to why this has come about in the first place. Like, what's the context? Why are we talking about whether sport should be free or not? I just, as someone that has missed this story, start at the beginning.
Well, I think the theory that sits behind all of this is that national sports and national sporting moments are important to an Australian society. And whether that's because it encourages people to pick up a new sport or a new exercise and it's a healthier country, or it improves the social fabric of the people around us, the government has recognised since about the 90s that some...
So not just the current government, governments of every persuasion.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So since the 90s, there's been this regime called the anti-siphoning legislation. And that was made when the government made a list of sports that they decided at the time should be televised free to the general public.
So you're saying in the 90s, there was this recognition that some sporting moments should be free to watch because of XYZ, whatever reasons that were given. And there is legislation to protect the fact that those sports should be watched for free.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
that's called anti-siphoning.
Yeah. And it's the big ticket items. So think the Olympics, the Paralympics, the AFL, the NRL, netball. There's a literal list of 10 sports and a couple of every 4-year events that are protected by this law.
And so they should be free to access, which means that they should be on like the Channel 7s, the Channel 9s, ABC, SBS, those things that you don't need to pay to access.
Yeah, and they remain on that list until 6 months before the event actually takes place. And before that cutoff point, the free-to-air broadcasters, so the 7s and 9s and 10s, they still have the opportunity to bid against each other. But they don't have to bid against, say, a Foxtel or a paid streaming or cable network. After that point where it's 6 months to go, none of the free-to-air networks want it, then it's opened up. So at that point, pay TV providers, so KO, now Amazon Prime's getting into sport, Netflix is getting into sport, they can make offers to the sports to broadcast those events. And that's done very formally with the minister literally saying it's open to everybody now. And the bit where it gets a little complicated is that pay TV providers can also make bids before that if one of the free broadcasters has said, yep, we want that sport. That doesn't override the bid. You kind of think of them as two separate bids. So, for example, the AFL is broadcast on both KO and Channel 7. But it's then up to us as viewers to pick where we choose. And the important thing for the government is that it is available for free somewhere.
Okay, so you're saying there that while it has to be available on a free-to-air channel. So it has to be available on, say, Channel 7 or Channel 9 or whatever it is. It can also be available on a KO or an Amazon Prime or a Stan Sport.
Yeah, it just can't only be available on a paid one.
Understood. So what's the issue? If that's how it's been working until now, what's the issue here?
So the government introduced a new bill last year that would amend this law to separate the rights into two buckets. So you've got broadcast rights and streaming rights. And so this separates the rights from Channel 9, which you can watch if your TV is connected to an antenna, to 9 Now. And under this bill, those are treated as basically different things. So in the broadcast right bucket, which is Channel 9 in this situation, nothing is going to change. There's still going to be that list of sports that the government has that has to be available for free somewhere on TVs with antennas. But for the new bucket, this bucket that's called the streaming bucket.
The one that we're watching.
Yeah, so 9 Now would be the equivalent here. This law would mean the right to watch sport for free would be taken away from the current way the streaming bucket is framed. So for you or I, this bill, which again, it hasn't passed yet, it's being discussed in Parliament. It means that if you're at a TV with an antenna, you can watch sport for free. But if you're relying on your TV that's connected to the internet, you might have to pay to watch a big sporting event because Stan or KO, which you have to pay for to access, may have the streaming rights over the 9 Nows or the 7 Pluses.
Because streaming has been separated from broadcast under this legislation. So even if the NRL Grand Final is on 7 for free, if you don't have free-to-air TV and a streamer has bought up the rights, digitally you'd have to pay for access to that.
Exactly. And one of the other arguments the government makes in supporting why they're taking this route with the bill is that Communications Minister Michelle Rowland says that for most major sports and sporting events, the rights are already guaranteed to be on free-to-air streamers as well as free-to-air aerial broadcasters until kind of the early 2030s. So take the Olympics, for example. Channel 9 have the rights to that until after the Brisbane 2032 Olympics. And she kind of says that in the meantime, they'll work on frameworks to ensure that there's some consistency across both buckets.
And I want to get to the reasons why there is some opposition to this proposal. But before we get there, are there any other reasons that the government has said that this is important?
Well, I think there's kind of two main ones to point out here. And if you look at the bill as a whole, one of the things the government is really pushing is the fact that they've included new sports into that list of anti-siphoning sports. So the ones that have to be free on aerial television. And in that list are things like the AFLW, the NRLW, the Paralympics, and there's some really important additions to that group of sport. And it feels very much more relevant to where we're at in 2024. The other big point to emphasize is the fact that the government's arguing that there's a new competitive environment with these streamers and that because of trends where more of us are using the internet to watch television, these streamers should have as much access to the sports that we all love to watch as the traditional media players who own the broadcast channels.
Okay, and so I understand that the government would be pushing this sort of legislation to, I guess, reflect modern day reality, which is that there are a lot of people who access information and watch, many things, including sport, in different ways. What's some of the opposition to this bill been?
So the main opposition voices in this discussion are the Greens and a group called Free TV Australia, and they're a group that represents the free-to-air networks, so the ones that get plugged into the wall. And they're really focused on what they say is a loophole in the bill that leaves those without an aerial TV connection without the same rights to the free sports on that anti-siphoning list than those who can plug their TV into a wall and have an aerial. And ultimately, that will force consumers like you and I to take out a subscription to a paid service like a KO, Netflix or Amazon Prime if they want to watch that sport. This is what Greens Senator Sarah Hanson-Young had to say on Sunrise this week.
Our country has celebrated watching sport together, celebrating the wins, commiserating the losses together. It's such an important part of who we are as a nation. I'm really pushing the government. Don't stuff this up. Don't lock out half the country.
I mean, that's what the Greens are saying in Free TV, whose job it is to lobby for those networks. How does the government respond to this?
Well, what I found interesting about trying to think through the answer to that question, Zara, is that the two groups are really operating on quite different sets of statistics. So the government, specifically the Communications Minister, Michelle Rowland, she says that according to the department's research, the majority of Australians do still have access to TV programs through an aerial TV. So this won't be alienating Australians in the way that she says the Greens are proposing. But on the other side of things, the Greens are relying on research presented by Free TV Australia, who's that peak body representing the broadcasters. And that research shows that only 29% of Aussies are watching TV exclusively through an aerial. And of that 29%, there's another 18% who are looking at switching to digital really soon.
Okay, so hypothetically, this bill passes as it currently stands. Can you just give me a bit of a scenario as to what it could be like for the average punter who just wants to watch the AFL Grand Final?
Yeah, so the AFL Grand Final, I'm sure the Swans are going to be there this year. I'm a diehard Swans fan. That's my disclaimer. That game is going to be available to stream on a 7 Plus, for example. Now, fast forward 12 months, that game might only be able to be streamed on KO, which is $30 a month. And that's because the same rights that extend to an aerial broadcast of the grand final won't extend to a digital broadcast.
I feel like in the broader kind of conversation about how we adapt to new realities, like new tech realities, like streaming giants and the like, this is not a uniquely Australian thing to be experiencing. Certainly we are a sport-obsessed country, but have we got any other examples of what this looks like what the framework looks like in other countries?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think we're kind of developing legislation and ideas around how we should be ingesting entertainment and sport in real time. Like, take Netflix, for example. There was a sentiment almost around this time last year that they'd almost saturated the movie viewing streaming market around the world. And the next frontier for them was sport. And so in Australia, one of their first major acquisitions in sport is going to be the WWE wrestling. And that's going to be only broadcast on Netflix. But if we take a more mainstream example, this year, Netflix bought the rights to the NFL games that are played on Christmas Day, which are big, families gathered around the TV style events. And that kind of means that for a diehard NFL fan who would want to watch every single game of the season, that's now spread out across 7 different streaming subscription networks.
Is that on free to air in the US?
Some games are. But if you want to watch every single game of the year, you might have to sign up to one to watch the Thanksgiving game, and you have to sign up to another one to watch the Christmas Day game. You might have to sign up to one to watch the Super Bowl. And that's probably the extreme example of a really fragmented rights situation, which could be really expensive.
A very interesting piece of legislation, and certainly one I would have possibly missed. So, Sam, thank you for explaining that. And if you are interested in sport, you don't have to be a diehard fan. You can sign up to our daily sport newsletter. It's very good, even if I say so myself. We will chuck a link in today's show notes and you can sign up there and it'll be in your inbox tomorrow morning. In the meantime, thanks for joining us today and we'll be back again tomorrow.